This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
If you're a seeker, don't miss the inspiring book Shamanic Awakening, Between the Dark and the Daylight. This remarkable work chronicles shamanic counselor and indigenously trained dream decoder Sandra Cochran's 35 years of experience with diverse wisdom keepers throughout the Americas. Sandy's initiations across the British Isles, Turkey, Greece, and Egypt, combined with her knowledge of symbology, psychology, and myth, influence her dream blog and workshops. Sandy offers private readings, sacred international journeys, a meditative CD, and her book, Shamanic Awakening, to encourage you as you navigate your earth walk and create a deeper connection to yourself. Find this and more at her website, starwalkervisions.com.
Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you from the mothership of paranormal programming, the X-Zone Broadcast Network. As always, it's my goal on this program to present to you, my listeners, with guests and commentary that will challenge your views of the paranormal. Here on Paranormal Stakeout, we champion research and the search for intellectual truth and our quest to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, the existence of worlds beyond our own. To do that, I look for those investigators, researchers, and practitioners who are in the field, on the line, conducting these investigations and gathering the evidence to prove our case. And I think it's important to know that when I say paranormal, I don't mean just ghosts. I'm talking cryptozoology as well as UFOs. With that, I want to welcome to the show an individual who is on the front lines of UFO research and investigation, renowned ufologist Kevin Randle. Kevin has for more than 45 years studied the UFO phenomenon in all its various incarnations, training by the Army as a helicopter pilot, intelligence officer, and military policeman, and by the Air Force both as an intelligence officer and public affairs officer. With this, Kevin provides a keen insight into the operations and protocols of the military, their investigations into UFOs, and into a phenomenon that has puzzled people for more than a century. Kevin's educational background is as diverse as his military experience. As an undergraduate at the University of Iowa, he studied anthropology. Graduate work included journalism, psychology, and military science at the University of Iowa, California Coast University, and the American Military University. He has both a master and doctoral degree in psychology and a second master degree in the art of military science. Kevin has written extensively on UFOs beginning in 1973 with articles in various national magazines. He has published many books about UFOs, starting with the UFO Case Book in 1989 and continuing to Crash When UFOs Fall from the Sky, Reflections of a UFO Investigator, Alien Mysteries, Conspiracies and Cover-Ups, and the Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover-Up, and his latest book, Roswell in the 21st Century. Kevin was away from his UFO studies when he was recalled to active duty with the Army that included a tour in Iraq from 2003 and 2004. He retired from the Army and the Iowa National Guard as a lieutenant colonel in 2009, and in 2013 was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for service in Iraq and the Air Medal for Valor and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry for his service in Vietnam. Kevin also hosts his own show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, A Different Perspective. His website is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Finally meeting you in wherever you are.
Yeah, and let me tell you, Kevin, thank you for your service to our country. You flew the venomous Cobra attack helicopter in Vietnam. You served us again in the Iraq War. Thank you for your service, sir.
Well, actually, I flew the Huey helicopter and not the Cobras.
Oh, okay. I thought you had the Cobra. That's matters not. You flew it over in Vietnam, and we appreciate your service.
We had Charlie Mountain gunships.
Okay. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, as I was saying, we had Charlie model gunships as opposed to the Huey Cobras. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, definitely a time of service for you, and it's greatly appreciated. Your work in UFO research is renowned. I mean, the books that you've written, the work that you've done, the controversies that you've found yourself embroiled in are well known. How did you get into the field?
I always blame my mother. She had an interest in science fiction, and science fiction, of course, is about aliens, civilizations, interstellar travel, and that sort of thing. And it's not a large step from the science fiction realm into UFOs because it's about alien civilizations and interstellar travel. So she sort of sparked my interest. And I remember when I was growing up, she took me to a movie, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which was allegedly based on Don Quixote's book, but it was in fact just they bought his title and his name and ran with it from there. So it kind of all evolved from my mother's interest in science fiction.
Okay, so and that was at a very young age. When did you ever experience anything at a young age?
No. The only thing I really did, I got interested in it and I carried out some investigations. And the first one I really did, a friend of mine's mother said that she had seen a flying saucer. And the only question I was really interested in asking her was it fuzzy or was it distinct? Because that was the theories going on at the time. Well, they're just indistinct blobs. Nobody really sees anything. And talking to her, she said it was a very distinct object hovering about 200 feet over the barn on their farm. And so that was the question I wanted answered. And from there, everything else expanded.
And that's, I guess, how a lot of people ended up getting into this field or getting interested in it, certainly back in those days. When we come back on the other side of this break, want to start talking to you a little bit about the Roswell incident, because that's really where your name became a household name. So we'll see you on the other side of the break, and we're going to get more into the Roswell incident.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
How would you like to be able to read other people's minds? Well, the next best thing is here. When you know how to read a person's name, you know how the person thinks, feels, and behaves. Each letter in our name holds a key to unlock our true essence. Our name contains both our gifts and challenges in this lifetime. Mnemology science discovers personality secrets hidden in the placement of the letters of our names, including the first and last impression people remember about us. Sharon shows us how to interpret the arrangement of letters as outlined in her book, Know the Name, Know the Person. Sharon Lynn Wyeth created mnemology science after 18 years of research and testing her theories, and has supported thousands of people around the world in understanding themselves and others better. You'll enjoy Sharon's unique teachings as she shares her system to learn the gifts behind your given birth name. Even if you don't like your birth name, there are jewels in this book. If you're thinking of changing your name, ready to name your child, or wanting to get along better with others, this is the book for you. If you'd like to improve your relationships and change your life for the better, get the book today, Know the Name, Know the Person, or visit www.knowthename.com. That's www.knowthename.com.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere, Florida. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine such as hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining rooms can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you visit, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic downtown Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best. Welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. This is your host, Larry Lawson, and tonight we've got Colonel Kevin Randle, ufologist extraordinaire, with us. Kevin, there's no doubt that the Roswell incident was probably one of the most important events in our history in dealing with UFOs, and you're at the forefront of a lot of this. Your current book, Roswell in the 21st Century, really opens up some other ideas and thoughts. Tell me how did you get connected with Roswell?
I was minding my own business at a science fiction convention. We were going to have a debate on whether UFOs were alien visitation or something more mundane. And it was 3 science fiction writers, I think Fred Pohl, I forget the second one, and then me, against the guys from the Center for UFO Studies. There was going to be 2 or 3 guys from the Center for UFO Studies. When they arrived, it was only Don Schmidt. The other guys from the center didn't show up. So I said, well, I'll switch sides because it's a debate. And in a debate, you're supposed to be able to take either side. And I figured, what the heck? I knew a lot about UFOs. I could do that. After we finished the debate, Don had said to me that they were planning to reinvestigate the Roswell case and wanted to know if I would help. The thinking being that with my military background and a lot of the witnesses at Roswell were military, retired military, that I would have some insights into their methodology and maybe would connect with them on a different level. And one of the first things I noticed is they were talking about how Colonel Thomas J. Dubose was the aide to General Ramey at the 8th Air Force headquarters. And I realized that a brigadier general does not have a full colonel as an aide. And it turns out that Dubose was in fact the chief of staff for the 8th Air Force, which is a much more important position than a simple aide to a general officer. So that, the kind of things that I brought to it. So I was invited into the Roswell investigation by the Center for UFO Studies, bringing my military expertise to bear on it. Don and I went down to Roswell in February of 1989. I had actually set up a meeting with Bill Brazel, the son of the man that found the debris, and that sort of thing before we got there. And we go down there, and the first group of people we run into, the meeting that we had set up, was a group of I don't want to say ufologists, a group of people in Albuquerque, and we got to their meeting, and it turned out they were really New Age oriented as opposed to UFO oriented. So that was kind of worthless. We were supposed to meet with Frank Joyce, who was one of the newsmen in Roswell in 1947, and he and George Walsh were responsible for putting out the press releases over the air that they had received from Walter Hott. But Joyce canceled on us because he was ill, and I think this thing was going downhill. We go to Roswell. We meet Cliff Stone, who brought no real expertise to the Roswell case. And I'm thinking, this is just absolutely going nowhere. We might as well just go home. Right. But then we talked to Bill Brazel, the man that had found the debris. And he changed the whole outlook. And as we were going back to the airport in Albuquerque, I said to Don, we've got to come back because there are so many other things we need to explore. So that was kind of the genesis of the whole Roswell investigation in 1989.
Now you became familiar with the Majestic 12, MJ12. When did that come into play with all this?
MJ12, the documents allegedly arrived at the home of Jamie Shandera, who was a Hollywood producer, which nobody had ever heard of, but a friend of Bill Moore, who was deeply involved in ufology at the time. They weren't released until 1987, and I think that, I know that Bill Moore had sent a copy of the MJ12 documents that they had received to Timothy Good in England, who was writing a book called Above Top Secret, and he released them to the press in England, and then Moore came out with their versions of it. So at that point, I'd heard about the MJ12. Don and I had met at another science fiction convention, I think. I'm not. We met somewhere, and he had a copy of the documents and showed them to me. And the first thing I noticed was it was Xeroxed. It wasn't an original document. Yeah. And I said, "Are you aware that in the 1950s and 60s, at least, the paper in the military was 8 by 10. It wasn't 8.5 by 11. It was 8 by 10. I don't know why they trimmed it that way. I don't know what the thought processes were, but the first thing I thought was, if this is a legitimate document from the military, the paper would be bizarrely sized, but we couldn't tell that because all we had were Xerox copies. So I became familiar with it then. And having talked to Bill Brazel, at that point, having talked to a number of other people in Roswell, I was more predisposed to believe that the MJ12 documents were real. I've since learned through the research that it's
not so much the case.
No, it's pretty much bogus.
Yeah. Now, for the listeners that may not be familiar with the Majestic 12 or MJ12, it's called, that was a document that purported to show the government was hiding evidence and proof of extraterrestrial visitation. Is that pretty accurate?
Sort of. And
okay.
I say that what the original MJ12 document was a briefing paper for President-elect Eisenhower in 1952, and a letter from President Truman authorizing the creation of the committee. So what they received on the microfilm, they got a 35 millimeter film, and they developed it. They saw this 8-page document that briefed President-elect Eisenhower about the crash in Roswell, and there wasn't much in there that was exciting other than this suggestion, but there wasn't information that could be checked out easily. There wasn't anything that could say yay or nay on the document. I mean, It's a Xerox copy. It's a photograph. It's a photograph of a document. It's not the original document, so you can't test the ink. You can't test the paper. You can't do any of the things that you would want to do on a question document. So what you have to look at is the text, and it talked about the crash in Roswell, New Mexico on, I think it said July 2nd, 1947. There were 4 alien bodies recovered in this. There was a second crash in 1950, December 6, 1950, in El Indio Guerrero area of Mexico, not far from Del Rio, Texas. Well, this actually led me to the reason for thinking that the documents were faked, because that information was based on the testimony of a guy named Robert Willingham, who claimed to be a retired Air Force colonel fighter pilot. And he had been involved in 1950, supposedly flying an F-94 with a group of people, and they saw the object crash and that sort of thing, and they chased it down, and it would crash just over the border in Mexico.
Okay.
Well, but it turns out that the original story that he told, I was actually able to find the original story. He had told it to a MUFON group in 1968, and they published a paragraph about it in the MUFON Journal, not the MUFON Journal, but the Skylook, which was a precursor to the MUFON Journal, in March of 1968. And it's on page 3, and it's a single paragraph, and it talks about Civil Air Patrol Lieutenant Colonel Robert Willingham. So this is kind of interesting. He's not Air Force. He's Civil Air Patrol. The aircraft he was flying, it was the F-94. He talked about 3 objects instead of 1, but it was 1948. the F-94 didn't exist in 1948. He talked about it being tracked by the DEW line, but the DEW line didn't exist in 1948. Later on, the date changed to December of 1950, and then when I finally talked to him, it was the mid-1950s, and he had this whole long story. So we've got this paragraph in the MJ-12 document that talks about this crash in the El Indio area. It's based on Robert Willingham's testimony, and it turns out Willingham's testimony is bogus. I checked his records through FOIA at the National Record Center in St. Louis. I also went to the Air Reserve Personnel Center, or Air Reserve Personnel Center in Denver, which kept records of the Air Force Reserve people. They had no record of this guy being a pilot. He said that in 1950 he was in Korea and was badly wounded, which took him out of flying fighters for the active Air Force, but he flew them in the reserves. I talked to a number of my friends who were Air National Guard fighter pilots and asked them about this. And that can't be true because the problem is the ejection system. If you were that badly wounded and they had to take you out of the cockpit, it was because of the ejection systems. He could have flown transports, he could have flown bombers. But we could find no record of his going to flight school. We could find no record of him being an Air Force officer. We could find no record of him being a fighter pilot. The other thing that keyed me, and I know this is a military pilot, the FAA said that if you were a military pilot and you wanted to get a commercial pilot's license, all you had to do was take a 50-question test on the FAA regulations. Every military pilot I know who took that test, me included, took the 50-question test and ended up with a commercial pilot's license. Willingham, according to the FAA, only had a private pilot's license. Why would he do that? You know, it's not nearly as prestigious as having a commercial license. So there were a lot of problems with his story in that respect. So if that's bogus, the crash didn't take place, then what does that say about the MJ-12 documents? I actually talked to Stan Friedman about this, and Friedman says, well, I believe that you are right about Willingham, meaning that he was bogus. He wasn't an Air Force officer, but you're wrong about MJ-12. But you've got this bogus paragraph in the MJ-12 documents, and the people who are creating this, for the President-elect of the United States, would have been well aware of the Del Rio crash had it been real. And the story did not surface until 1968, so there's no way for that to be in the MJ-12 documents. So to me, that suggested the whole thing.
Well, you're a cop. You're a military policeman. I'm a civilian cop. We both do the same thing. When you have that kind of bogus information in the middle of your evidence, you've got to throw the whole thing out. You can't take it as legitimate.
People say, well, see, it's disinformation. And so there's real information in it, and there's disinformation in it. So, well, how do you separate the two? Where do you draw the line? What do you know? I could find nothing that suggested that the MJ-12 documents are real. But there is kind of a funny aside to this. You know, Stan Friedman believes in the crash on the plains of San Augustine. It was part of the Roswell case. And he said, you know, do you have any documents proving there was no crash on the plains of San Augustine? So as a joke, I sent him MJ-12 because they didn't mention the crash on the plains of San Augustine, and he didn't apparently think that was funny. I thought it was hilarious myself.
Yeah, it's tough when somebody's trying to pull all the wool over your eyes and you pull it back. So this tells me a whole lot about the Roswell incident and MJ-12. A lot of folks don't realize it. Now, this also leads into, if I'm not mistaken, the films that came out later with the alien autopsy. Wasn't that all connected too?
Well, let me just take a step back to MJ-12 just for a moment to make it clear that this is really not part of the Roswell case. This is a hoax that was derived by, I'm pretty sure, Bill Moore and Jamie Sandera to propel themselves back into the spotlight because we have this document. So it's really not part of the Roswell case. I mean, it doesn't really impinge on the other evidence for Roswell. It's just one thing that suggested a hoax. And when you talk about the alien autopsy, which is where we're going with this, I suppose, you've got the same thing. It sort of relates to Roswell, but it's really not part of the case.
And that is a bang that you took unfairly from folks, because you found problems with MJ-12. You found obvious flaws, and people from that took that you meant to say that the whole Roswell incident didn't exist, and that was kind of an unfair hit.
Absolutely. I did not. In the UFO field, you apparently have to embrace everything. regardless of how ridiculous it is, or suddenly you're a debunker. And I've been called a debunker recently many, many times.
Yeah. Well, when we get back, I got to ask you some questions about a mummy in Mexico City. And when we get back from this break, this is Larry Lawson, Paranormal Stakeout. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A Soul Balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout with Larry Lawson, your host, and Kevin Randle, our guest tonight. Kevin, this has been an informative show, and I got to tell you, being a police officer, you being a military police officer, I like the way that you looked at this situation, the documents, and you ferreted out the true information. So my compliments there, sir, because people giving this type of disinformation hurts all of us in the paranormal field. So I'm really impressed with the work you did there.
Well, I would like to say that I think probably most of my expertise came from being an intelligence officer and having to analyze the data from multiple sources, some of which may be credible, some of which may not have been credible, and trying to formalize a kind of a briefing for those who would be flying the aircraft and that sort of thing. So I think that's also a major part of my analysis, the way I analyze various things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's no different. Intelligence work and police work, they do intertwine. Without that, I mean, who knows how far this information could have gone? And still, from the way I understand it, people are still believing it and trying to debunk you. So.
Yeah, if you can't refute the evidence, attack the reporter on it, and that goes on a long way. I am absolutely flabbergasted when things seem so clear to me that others don't follow my way of thinking, I guess. But well, I mean, don't see it as clearly as I do. I've been wrong on things, but you've got to take a look at the evidence and where it goes.
Well, I was talking with some other folks tonight about folks getting so deeply involved in investigations that they allow their emotions to take over, to cloud their judgment. Do you think that's part of the case here, or?
People allow their belief structures to influence their investigations and influence what they believe and what they disbelieve, where they go with these sorts of things. When I was beginning the UFO investigations when I was very, very young, I was surprised that it seemed that every UFO investigation that I went on came out as unknown, unidentified, couldn't do it. I said, this can't be right. So I started going back and looking at that, and I realized that my belief structure that there was alien visitation was coloring my thinking, and I wasn't asking the follow-up questions. You have to ask the follow-up questions. And one of the best examples of this is, again, in the Roswell case, there was the firefighters, the civilian firefighters, where the story was they had been called out to make a run out to the crash site. And I went through the records at the fire department. We couldn't find anything like that at all. So we were talking about that. Carl Flock, when he did his anti-Roswell book, he said he talked to a number of the firefighters and said now they didn't make a run outside the city limits, and this was affecting the testimony of Frankie Rowe, the daughter of one of the firefighters, said, yeah, they went out there. So I'm talking to the same guy that Carl Flock had talked to. And I was getting the same information from him. Yeah, the fire department didn't make a run. They didn't go, this sort of thing. And I said, do you know Dan Dwyer, Frankie Rowe's father? He said, oh, I know Dan. He went out there. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he went out in a civilian car. It wasn't part of the fire department went it, but after they'd heard the story, he went out there in his private automobile. So it wasn't a fire run. It wasn't the fire department went, but Dan Dwyer did go out there. Carl got the information he wanted, which was the fire department didn't make the run. He didn't ask the next question. And my next question was simply, do you know Frank? Did you know Dan Dwyer? And he said, yeah. And that's where I got the rest of the information about Dwyer going out there on his own. And it wasn't a part of fire one, which is why we couldn't find a record. He went out in his private car.
Well, and that's good old-fashioned police work, intelligence work, whatever you want to call it. But that's what it takes in our field. Let me ask you this question. We've all heard about the infamous alien autopsies. It was on TV. They really sensationalized it. You'd have to be pretty. You'd have to be wanting to believe really hard to believe any of that on TV. But there was an incident involving an alien mummy in Mexico City that isn't quite as well known. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, absolutely. I know quite a bit about it. The thing was, back in 2012, Tom Carey asked me to go to Church's Fried Chicken while we were in Roswell, and I've never turned down an invitation to Church's Fried Chicken. And now, having said that on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, I hope that they will send me all kinds of free fried chicken. But he wanted to write the ultimate Roswell book with me. And I said, yeah, that's great. I'm all for it. Let's do that. We set the thing in motion, and we're having a meeting in Roswell. We happen to be in Roswell for the festival down there. And we're holding a meeting to discuss the book. And I said at the time, we need something exciting, something new and different for the book that, set it apart. And Tom and Don sat there and didn't say a word to me. Well, they had already learned about these slides that apparently showed an alien creature. Didn't say a word to me about it, but they continued the investigation. They were involved with a guy named Joe Beeson and Adam Dew. Adam Dew was their main contact. And they had scans of the slide that showed this creature that Tom was absolutely convinced was one of the Roswell aliens. Don says he wasn't convinced and they wanted to investigate this whole thing. But that they spent a lot of time doing that. Well, the whole thing leaked into the public arena. And I suspect it was Adam Dew and Joe Beeson who was leaking it to create a buzz about this possible alien creature. They determined that the slide was from the late 1940s. The mount was correct. The chemical composition of the film was correct. They looked at it at Kodak, and they said, yes, this is from the late 1940s. So the time fit that. And they were talking to anthropologists. They were talking to everybody else, trying to find out what the slide was. And they determined that it was an alien creature. And they had a big program down in Mexico City to introduce this thing to the world. In May of 2015. Well, in December of 2014, after we'd learned about this, and I was communicating with Tom Carey at the time, I was trying to find out what it could be if it wasn't an alien creature. Could it be something from a science fiction movie? I could find no science fiction movies where the aliens weren't really humans dressed up in bizarre costumes and that sort of thing. And I got to thinking, well, this supposedly photo was taken in the desert Southwest. Could it be a mummy? Because I know that that environment sort of creates mummies on its own. And there's a thing called the on Interstate 10, the thing, they called it, the thing. What is the thing? Well, I actually finally stopped one time as I traveled along there to look at it, and it was apparently the mummy of a conquistador. So I sent an email to Tom. I said, could this be a mummy? He said, no, it's not a mummy. We looked. So we get down to Mexico City. There's a placard that's in the slide that has some writing on it and that sort of thing, but they're showing all this thing, and they're doing this big program about how this is an alien creature, and they've done their due diligence in their research. Within 48 hours of this, a group called the Roswell Slides Research Group, and it included a lot of people. Paul Kimball was one of them. Kurt Collins was one of them. A whole bunch of people like this trying to read this placard, and within 40 hours they were able to read the first line that said it was the mummy of a 2-year-old boy. I don't know why Tom and Don didn't come up with this. I don't know why they wanted. I know Tom wanted to believe that they had the smoking gun. This was the evidence of alien visitation, because here's a picture of it. You look at the background of the slide, you can tell it's in some kind of a museum. There was all kinds of red flags and clues that they just flat missed on this thing.
Do you think he wanted to believe it so bad he was just willing to?
Tom wanted to believe so badly that he was willing to overlook it. Don has a sad sense that he was more cautious as this, and that they hadn't said it was a Roswell slide. So I began calling it the not Roswell slides. But Tom in one of the first interviews he did linked it to Roswell, and then in other interviews he'd done, he's linked it directly to Roswell. And in fact, it goes back to Frankie Rowe, the firefighter's daughter, who was describing what her father had told her about it, and said it was like the child of the earth, which is the Jerusalem cricket. It's an insect. And there's this marking on the head of the Jerusalem cricket, and he saw this marking, what he thought was this marking on the head of this mummified child. And so he was absolutely convinced it was Roswell. But I think his will to believe was so strong that he was willing to overlook the problems. Like they apparently only saw the slides in a short meeting in Chicago, and they only had a handheld slide viewer, not projected on the wall. And I don't know why you wouldn't have demanded that. The scans they supposedly were working with had been manipulated so you couldn't read the placard as easily as it as it was eventually de-blurred by by getting a higher quality scan, at least is from what I've been told. But there were all sorts of red flags about this thing that they should have picked up on, and I think that they were just wanting to believe that this is the absolute smoking gun proof. And even if it was a legitimate photograph, it is in fact only a photograph, and it doesn't get you all the way to alien visitation. But this thing blew up after the big presentation in Mexico City. It blew up within 48 hours, and it was just stunning the way the thing collapsed.
Yeah, it fell apart very, very quickly. So in our last few minutes before our last break, you've taken a lot of heat for your book, your views on Roswell. What do you think happened at Roswell? What is your opinion?
I am back into the unknown category, the unidentified category. I can tell you many things what it is not. I can tell you, based on the research done by not only Don Schmidt and me, Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, Stan Friedman, by the Air Force, we can tell you a lot of things that it isn't. I cannot tell you what it is. I can tell you something fell. I can tell you that the military responded in a fashion that suggests it was something unusual, the way they went through the whole thing. But when we get right down to it, all we have is the testimony, which is no longer as robust as I thought it was. We have a couple of people who allegedly saw bodies, which, if their stories are accurate, suggest it is not human. But we don't have the kind of proof that you would want to say, yes, this was an alien spacecraft crash. So I'm back in the unknown category. I'm not sure what it was, but we just can't get to the extraterrestrial point of view from the information and the evidence that we have at this point.
Okay, then my next question to you. Is there evidence, in your opinion, that we've been visited by people from another planet?
I think there are better cases, and one of them was Levelland, Texas in 1957, where we had witnesses at 13 separate locations talking about the craft interacting with the environment. And by that, I mean it was down close to the ground, it stalled car engines, it caused headlights to fade, it interrupted the electrical circuits in the cars, and when the objects disappeared, then the lights would come back on, the radio started playing, and they could start their cars again.
Close encounters of the third kind sort of thing.
No, because the occupants weren't seen. It was
true.
Just,
I was basically
a close encounter of the second kind, to be precise.
Okay.
But the point was, the people at these various locations were reporting it to the law enforcement independently of one another. There wasn't radio programs going on. It wasn't in the internet. It wasn't on television. They were reporting it independently. And so you've got that sort of thing going on. And then a few hours later, you've got another set of incidents that take place at White Sands missile range, which is not that far, like 3-4 hours from Levelland. But this is a really interesting group of sightings.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that and maybe your favorite sighting when we come back. We're about ready to go on this other break. We're talking with Kevin Randle. He's on the X Zone Broadcast Network, hosting A Different Perspective, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And Kevin, we're going to see you in our last segment in just a second here.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? I'm Dr. Kimberly McGeorge, and on The Secret to Everything, we will merge the practical with open investigation into all realms of the mysterious. We will talk to cutting-edge alternative health practitioners, those who inspire and motivate you in business and life, and of course, we will share stories of the paranormal, conspiracy, and cryptozoology. You will transform because of the frequency I carry, the frequencies my guests carry. Life may never be the same after you listen to this program, for the secret to everything is for you, the listener, for those who desire more in every area of their lives and believe that it can still be found. Listen and discover thesecrettoeverything.com.
Little children aren't the only ones afraid of the dark. Millions of soldiers return from war zones with PTSD, anger, frustration, fear, and loneliness, much of which surfaces during the darkness of the night. You have the chance to change the lives of these American heroes. Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us provides free MP3 players for these men and women. With a list of 3 million songs in 16 different styles, 100,000 audiobooks, and 30,000 old-time radio programs, every veteran can find something to soothe and comfort them at no cost. All our players contain an 8-hour audio program designed to help veterans fall asleep. With 1,500 plus vets now participating, it's our goal to deliver 10,000 audio players this year. Go to our website at songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us. Help us help a veteran make it through the night.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout, folks, with our guest tonight, Kevin Randle. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. It's been a tremendous honor. I'd like to tell everybody to please visit Kevin at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Also, make sure that you tune into his show, Different Perspective, here on the XZBN Broadcast Network. And don't forget the rest of all of our outstanding programming on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Visit us on www.xzbn.net for all program schedules. I'd also like you to invite all of you to visit me at my websites at www.paranormalstakeout.com. If you have a message to send me, you can get it to me that way. And also www.paranormalfbi.com. And check us out on Facebook, Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation. Kevin, as we begin to wrap up tonight, we spent a lot of time on Roswell. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and showing that I have no knowledge of promotion, when we were talking about the Roswell slides, I should have mentioned that you can read the whole chronology and all the information about it in Roswell in the 21st Century, because there's a long section heavily footnoted about how that whole thing went down. So if you're interested in more information about that, there would be a place to look for it.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned that earlier. Thank you for bringing that up, as well as your other books, which really give a keen insight into the world of UFO research and investigation. Keeping in mind, you mentioned before that you had a case that really provided better evidence than Roswell. What was probably the most significant case that you've investigated yourself, that you've encountered yourself?
I have done limited work on the Levelland case, and I think that's an important case because of all the elements. When you're looking to prove something like this, you need multiple chains of evidence. Eyewitness testimony isn't sufficient. You need something more. And
yeah, absolutely.
With the Levelland case, you had the electrical interference. Neither the Air Force nor the civilian organizations bothered to try to create any kind of evidence, physical evidence from that. But in later years, and this case goes back to 1957, so we're more than half a century away from it. The sheriff was said, well, he didn't see much. He went out and searched for it. They saw a streak of light in the sky. But it turns out that according to the family, and this is something that we didn't know then, there was a burned area on the ground in one of the ranches out there in the Levelland area, a big circular burn that the sheriff had gone out to investigate. Now, had that information been available in 1957, that provides us with a third chain of evidence. We could gather physical evidence from this burn area, but given the way the whole thing went down in our world as it did, this information came from the sheriff's wife and his daughter 50 years after the fact, and the sheriff is dead. So there's no way to confirm it. It's interesting information. It's a lost opportunity to learn more about the UFOs and what was going on. But at this point, all we can say is, well, we have this interesting case with testimony. We have this interesting case where there was reported interference with the electrical systems of various vehicles, not just cars, but a couple of Columbines down near Pettit, Texas, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So you have all of that sort of thing going on. So the Levelland case is very important. It was a large red object seen, a glowing red object that landed in front of cars, landed along the side of the highway, took off, stalled the car engines, and that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting case. But again, it's a half century old. If we move forward at all, you look at the Rendlesham Forest case. That's the Bentwaters case with the military security police going out into Rendlesham Forest, seeing an object on the ground in the.
That was in England. Was that in England?
Yes, that's England. Colonel Charles Halt was the deputy base commander at the time, and he had a tape recorder with him, so he was commenting in the tape as things were going on, and wrote a letter to the higher authorities about what had transpired. So it's an interesting case, but again, it's one of those, it's kind of a missed opportunity because everybody was arguing over whose jurisdiction it was. The English said, well, it's American soldiers involved, and it took place at an American base, therefore the Americans should be handling it. The Americans said, well, the forest is actually British soil, and the British should be handling it. So everybody is arguing about who should be investigating, and too much of it was overlooked at the time.
That happens way too often, not only in UFO investigations, happens in paranormal investigations, happens in criminal investigations. People just want to argue, and by the time they're done, the opportunity has passed. That's a shame. Do you have anything that comes to mind in recent years? Brentwood was about 10 years ago, right?
Well, Bentwaters was actually 1980, so it was quite a while ago.
Oh, quite a while. Okay.
But I've had an opportunity to talk to the principals involved, John Burroughs, Jim Pettiston, Colonel Halt. I've had an opportunity to talk to the principals involved in this thing, so it's a case that I'm familiar with. The case from the early 2000s with the object over the Texas White House with George W. Bush. there is some information about that is kind of hinky. And by that I mean it seems like they scrambled fighters to intercept these objects near the Western White House, but that turns out to be really quite the way it worked out. So there's some problems with that. Same thing with O'Hare in I think it was 2008. There's some good, interesting testimony, but there's some problems the way things were gathered and that sort of thing. So the older cases seem to be more robust, I guess is what I'm driving at. They're more interesting because there's more elements to it. It's not just things seen in the sky. It's things seen on the ground. It's things leaving traces on the ground. It's people seeing the creatures from inside the craft outside reporting it. So you got Socorro in 1964 with Lonnie Zamora, the police officer who saw the object landed and saw the two creatures outside the craft getting back in and taking off. So there's some interesting things going on, but the problem is nothing there is of sufficient evidentiary quality to lead us directly to the extraterrestrial and say, well, this sounds interesting. It sounds alien, but we don't have the physical evidence to actually prove it.
And that's what we got to have, is that physical evidence. And we talk about that on our side of the fence all the time also. So where do you see the future for UFO investigations? What can we do to improve that situation?
I think we need to remove our personal belief structures from the investigations and look at it from a more dispassionate point of view. And now I get to drop a name. Back in the 1970s, I had an opportunity to talk to James Van Allen, the radiation belt guy. Mm-hmm. I had a friend, Bob Cornett, and we were working on some UFO stuff, and he said, we should talk to Van Allen. And he said, I know Van Allen. I'm thinking, sure you do. And we were in the physics building, the Van Allen physics building, in the elevator, and Van Allen gets on the elevator. And my friend Bob Cornett says, hi, Van. And Van Allen says, hi, Bob. So it was clear that he knew him. And I had the opportunity to interview Van Allen about this, and I asked him a similar question about that. And what he said is you need to look at it from a dispassionate point of view. You need to gather the evidence dispassionately, not allow your own belief structures and your own thinking to influence where you're going with this. Let the evidence lead you the way. And he also said something that struck me as funny, is he said that if you're in the middle of Wyoming and you hear the thunder of hooves, you don't expect zebra. And not long after that, there was a story in the newspaper about a zebra that escaped from a zoo running around loose in Wyoming. So you could have been hearing the thunder of hoofbeats in Wyoming, and it could have been a zebra. So yeah, it's just sort of that synchronicity of these things coming about. But that's where we need to go. We need to look at it dispassionately. We need to leave the New Age woo-woo out of it. And try to determine exactly what is going on, whether it's alien, whether it's interdimensional, whether it's time travelers from the future, which is my favorite explanation, but probably the least likely explanation. But the time travelers are more fun than a lot of the other things.
Well, it sounds like the same obstacles that you face in investigating UFOs and alien visitations is the same that we face in the paranormal world, and that's taking that emotional, personal view out of it and looking at the evidence dispassionately and collecting that evidence in such a way that we can use it and preserve it and use it later in my visionary court of law, if you will. Sounds like you face the same thing that we do.
Absolutely, and that's where I've been coming from when I wrote the book Roswell in the 21st Century. I wanted to look at it in a dispassionate light, in that sort of way, and present the evidence as succinctly as possible without a lot of editorial comment about it. And that's why when you say, what do you think Roswell was, I have to take a step back and say, even though I'd like to believe it was alien, I have to look at it and say the evidence, while interesting and suggestive of alien, does not prove the case. So we have to say, I really don't know what it was.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing, is taking that emotion out. People get so they're either on one side of it or the other, and their emotions take over in that way, or sometimes they're just so excited they want things. You described that earlier with the Mexico mummy, if you will. It was just somebody's desire to want it to happen so bad they did, and we find that happening in the paranormal ghost field all the time also. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. There's so many things I want to talk to you tonight. I want to mention another book that you wrote, you and I talked about it the other day, called Conversations. And that's really your delving, and we don't have a lot of time to go into it now, but that's your delving almost over into the paranormal ghost side of it with past lives. I'd like
Well,
to get you.
it started as an alien abduction and it evolved into something else. So, just quickly and succinctly.
Yeah, and I'd like to invite everybody, all my listeners, Conversations by Kevin Randle. Get that book. Kevin, it's been a great show. I really appreciate you being on. I'm looking forward to having you back on again and covering some more topics.
I'd love to do it.
All right, my friend. Take care. And folks, thank you for listening, and we will see you on the other side.